We are live. Hello, Kevin.
Hello.
How are we doing today?
I am doing well. Thank you for asking. How about yourself?
It's Friday.
It's
I'm
Friday.
honestly, I'm happy it's Friday. It's been a
I
difficult week.
I can relate to that energy. Yes, 100%. Yes. It is I'm definitely feeling that Friday energy for sure.
Exactly. Um, so the first question I ask all my guests on the podcast is always the same, and is who is Kevin Rapp? And I don't want you to talk about work or the online persona.
Yeah, sure.
I'm asking like who Kevin is, the person behind the persona.
That's a good question. Because I mean, my standard answer would be to just go into, I think a lot of us, when we're asked who we are, our standard response is to go to labels, right? Like, oh, I'm a creative director. I own an agency. I'm a father of four and a husband, and I'm the biggest X-Men dweeb you'll ever meet. So there's lots of canned answers I could give to that question, but if I try to examine a little deeper, the things that really drive me are that I am a person who cares about the creative community and sees the ways in which we have been externally undervalued and the way that we undervalue ourselves because of the way we respond to those external forces. And I care about helping all creative people recognize the value that they bring to this world and to empower themselves to advocate for themselves. Um, I'm a person who recognizes that the systems that have been set up don't serve us very well, and that we need to take active steps to, if not dismantle those systems, build something new that can work within those systems, right? Like, I will never be able to destroy late stage capitalism, but I can at least find ways to ethically run a creative business and advocate for the people around me. And so I'm always thinking of how I can support people and build the right kind of creative community that I want to exist in this world. And I've been fortunate enough to be put into circumstances where I've gotten to see the tangible value of what we bring. And I try to be a whisperer between the forces of business and the forces of creative to try and help creatives like understand why what they do is so powerful. I think in my heart of hearts, I've done a lot of cool projects over my career, but ultimately the projects aren't the thing that I really want to be the impact that I bring. I don't want somebody to say like, Kevin's great, he increased our ROI, right? Like that's not the thing that I really get out of bed for. If I look back over my career, the things that I'm proudest of are the ability that I've had to help artists advocate for themselves better. And that's the thing that I, at the core of who I am, will be always kind of fighting for.
When I ask this question, it's always interesting for me because you and I have never really talked before, so we don't know each other. But I target myself to be pretty good at reading the room when I observe people, even if it's like virtually, like seeing what you post or reading what you write, the podcast you've already participated in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've made a lecture of who you were. And when people answer this question, it's always for me a game of like, was I right or wrong? Yeah. And in this case, I'm happy to say that I was right. And that makes me really happy because that to me means that we're going to have like a very meaningful conversation. And something that resonated before even going to other topics strongly with what you just said you mentioned like, the services and the systems put in place
Yeah.
are not are not designed for us in a way.
They're not.
And that resonated with me very strongly because my father had a company. My father is an engineer,
Mhm.
and he had a company for many, many years in South America. I'm from South America, and
Mhm.
and he used to build these huge dams and bridges and stuff for these contractors, private contractors, and he was the one giving the best pay to all the workers.
Yeah.
And every other investor was like, you should pay them less. Like
Right.
technically it's like you should slave them more,
Mhm.
And later, like years after, we had a conversation with my father, and he told me like, you know what, like I might have been able to do a lot more money if I wanted to
Mhm.
throughout my career, but that would have mean treating people like slaves, and I
Mhm.
cannot do that.
Mhm.
So I'm okay with being less rich, but like being richer as a human being. So
Right.
so I
I love
connected
that.
with what you said there directly, um, which brings me to something. One of the reasons I wanted to talk with you on the podcast is you made a post. It was already some time ago, but it stayed with me through time. And it's a post where you talk about failure
Mhm.
and burning out,
Mhm.
and how you were burned out, even if you were at the highest, like at a high point of your career. So you
Sure.
you were being successful, jobs were
Yeah.
coming in,
Yep.
but you burned out, and then you failed with a client.
Yep.
And literally you fired yourself from the job, and you returned like the money that the client had paid you.
That's right.
And that stayed with me because, first of all, that's something that nobody does. Like everybody shares success. Everybody, yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of people talking about um, imposters in syndrome, and I mean it's a dead beaten horse. But like
Yes.
nobody has ever. I mean, you're one of the very few ones that spoke about that. I failed.
Yep.
I had to assume the consequences,
Yep.
even if I was at a high point of my career.
Mhm.
And I wanted to know if you could like elaborate more on that. Like
Yeah.
what pushed you to share that story?
I think there's a lot of reasons why I chose to share it. Part of it is that there is a huge online facade, right? Like there is a persona that you have to embody when you build your own social media brand, right? Like the brand of Kevin Rapp that appears on LinkedIn is not the whole aspect of who I am as a person. Like there are facets of me, but the dials are turned up, right? Like there are aspects of me that show up very prominently, and then there are aspects of me that I don't really share. Like I don't talk about my family, which is a huge part of my life, but I want to respect the privacy of my family, and so I don't really talk about that very much. And so when I look at when people post something vulnerable, it's often sympathy bait. It's often like, oh, I used to feel imposter syndrome, but now look how great I am, right? Or let me tell you about how hard things are because I want to present myself as sympathetic in a way that you will feel an affinity towards me. I I wanted to get beyond the fake version of what vulnerability means and be genuinely vulnerable. Share something that is not something that I'm proud that happened. It's something that uh, is still to me like something I'm recovering from still, like months after it happened, because I do tie a lot of my identity into the work. And so when I fail, it's not that I messed up on this job, it's that a core part of my identity was less than what it needed to be. And so that's something that like just stays with you. And I wanted to be honest with that because I think that a lot of artists have felt that feeling before. And I wanted to share in a, yes, like the business is going great. We're able to sell work a lot. Like this was one of our highest paid months that we ever had. And by the definitions of the, finance chart, it was our best month ever. But for me personally, it was the worst month since I started the business because I overextended myself in a way to where I was not physically capable of doing my job at the level of excellence that I expect. And I wanted to be honest about what that feeling was like and how I am still going through the after effects of that and how I am still how I wanted to handle that ethically with my clients and the way that I, navigated those choices as a co-business owner and how I'm navigating that on a road to recovery because burnout is hard and it's something that a lot of us go through and a lot of us go through silently. And I knew that there was a risk in doing that, right? There was a possibility that my clients would come back and say like, I don't know if we can trust working with them anymore if like they're not able to keep up with the demands of what we had. And I found the exact opposite to be true. I found that our clients were genuinely very caring and just said, hey, we've got this other thing for you, but we understand that like you guys have some capacity issues right now. So just let us know if you can't take it on. Like they couldn't have responded more kindly and more empathetically to what we were going through. And I genuinely feel that there is a lot of value in being human in business. I feel like there is we talk a lot about how people buy from people and people throw these cliches around, but few people actually really lean onto the true human aspects of what makes a business run. And they let the fears of having to appear professional all the time limit them from what they say and what they do. And I guess I want to push that boundary a little bit more. I continually show myself to be an unprofessional goober sometimes when I talk. And I also wanted to showcase some more aspects of myself that aren't necessarily flattering, but they encompass parts of who I am as a person. And I wanted to give more people permission to be able to do that for themselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying resonates with me strongly because, what you were talking about that facade, like, being professional and everything. And I think, like, I suppose you burned out, first of all, because you had taken too much.
Way too much.
And I think as in our community, we are all taking too much. That's something I've been like advocating for a while, is that you cannot be all those things at once and be good at all of them. And no. So people are pushing themselves way over the edge because now you have to do your job. You have to do BTS of your job. You have to be active on social media. Mm-hmm. You have to outreach for new clients. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
And each of those categories is a job on its own.
Easily. Like full brands have specific jobs designed for each of those roles, right? Like that is not supposed to be one thing that one person does.
And what I also think you're spot on is just people have forgotten through I don't know, social media and current economics just to be themselves. Mm-hmm. And to be yourself is your best brand in a way. Because we had the discussion with Bling My Brain with Ariel Costa. And he was saying, like, I have a very specific style, and it's wonky, it's weird,
it's gorgeous.
It's gorgeous, of course. But he was so humble about it, but he said, like, But when a client comes to me, they know what they're getting,
Yeah.
and they know what they're getting. It's not only the work, it's the person. Yeah. It's the interaction you're getting. And so I find it very honest from you to be able to go and say a client and say, like, I'm not doing well and I've failed here. And I think the best thing is, like, either we freeze that or you give it to someone else, because right now I cannot handle it. Yeah. And I'm happy that also that the client was connected to that. Yeah. Which brings me to another thing you also shared that is, to me, probably linked with this. Yeah. You made a pause in social media. Yeah. Why?
Part of it was that I was burnt out, and I was looking at the holidays coming up, and I was saying to myself, I am fried. Do I really want to make a bunch of scheduled posts when I am like scrambling to get the work that I need to get done before I take a break for the holidays? I was doing my best not to work over that break, and the amount of work that we had at that time was like, that might not even be possible to even take a break. I might need to do some work over the holidays. And so I was trying to eliminate that. And then I was looking down the barrel of, okay, do I schedule a bunch of posts so that I can like have stuff coming out during the holidays? Do I want to make content during that time? How do I want to approach this? And ultimately I decided, you know what? I need to give myself space here. I am recovering from burnout, and I think that means that I need to recharge. And that doesn't just mean I need to take away the work stuff that is client work. I think I also need to take away the work stuff that is the backside of the business that always needs to be running in order to keep the engine of the business going, like social media and marketing. I think in order to really give myself some space to recover, I actually need rest, because no muscles are going to heal if you keep running at full speed or even at like half speed. And so I really just, I made the conscious choice to say, I'm going to take a break. And maybe it's cheesy to say I'm taking a break from social media because so many people do that. But I decided to make that conscious choice of giving myself and my brain more space to truly relax, because especially when I've been going through the kinds of sprints that I've been going through, I needed to give my mind time to relax.
Yeah, I mean, the brain is you have to feed it. You have to stop and go through the feeding process to then be able to output again. And I don't find it cheesy at all. What you said is like, I'm taking a pause. No, I mean, honestly, because when I look at my feed today, and I'm going to talk about LinkedIn because let's talk about a professional network.
Yeah, a professional network. Yes,
between quotes.
Mm-hmm.
Between the nonstop feed of salesmen, because you mentioned that, like people are falsely being honest, because in the end, everybody's trying to sell you something, or buying your attention. So between that and the, to avoid naming it, all the technological advances that have been like flooding our feeds, it is overwhelming. It is, I mean, it's an exercise that I practice because we have to. There's no other way, sadly, today to put yourself out there. That has become the norm. But you have to be prepared to cope to cope the flood. Uh, and what has been like a phenomena that I've been like observing more and more recently, it's like a spiral, because you're forced to be in there, and at the same time you don't want to be in there. Like, honestly, if I could choose, I wouldn't be in any of those. Like the time it sucks for me to prepare the posts and the things and whatever. It's like I'm inside of my head. There's like a monkey with the things going like, you should be doing something else. You should be doing something else. You should be doing, and I'm like, yes, I know. And so, you know, you mentioned, like you said, you wanted to be kind of like authentic about the burnout and the thing, but you also said, and I'm not saying this to like pin you down or whatever. It's like I like to see how you react to this. Is you also said that on social media, it's very difficult or almost impossible to be authentic in a way.
Yeah, I do. Yes, 100%.
And that like you should embrace your idiosyncrasies.
Yeah.
So that might be a little bit I understand what you meant, but that might be a little bit cryptic for somebody else. Yeah. So if you could elaborate on that, that will be great.
Absolutely. I think that goes back to what I said earlier, which is that it's not authentic for me to talk about my business accomplishments. Like, I don't walk into a room and introduce myself and say, hi, I'm Kevin Rapp. Here's the ways in which I delivered return on an investment to all of these businesses that I've worked for. That's not how I authentically start a conversation normally. But in LinkedIn and social media, professional social media, that is a standard practice of how people introduce themselves. So I don't find it, everyone always says, be authentic, just be you. But they try to present themselves as the professional, hireable version of themselves. And what they mean is like, have some flavor of personality so that we know who you are, but they don't mean truly be authentic. They don't mean truly showcase the type of person that you are. And so that's why I made that adjustment where don't be authentic, be idiosyncratic. Lean in on the things that make you unique and leverage the aspects of your personality that make you an ideal fit for that platform, right? So I think the fact that I have a sense of humor is something that makes some of my content more enjoyable. Some of my highest performing posts are the ones where I'm just riffing and making a gag, right? Some of the posts that I make are a little bit more business value driven. But I'm always leaning on what is the unique voice that I bring to the table. What is the unique set of experiences that I have that no one else has? What is the point of view that I bring that is different than other people in the space who might be compared to me as competitors or peers? What is the perspective that I have that is unique and stands out in the space? Because we have so much that feels very samey on LinkedIn. It's a very gray platform of a lot of noise. There's a lot of signal, and there's so much of it, and it keeps growing every day because the platform is growing, that we're only going to see more and more content coming in there. And I think the only way to truly stand out as the signal to the noise is to have a unique and clear perspective that resonates with people. And that's where idiosyncrasies come in. Having that uniqueness, that standout, that like, I don't know what it is, but that person has like charisma. Like, I think charisma is genuinely more important than authenticity on a social platform, because like you can be authentically boring, Like there are people that I know that very authentically, very genuinely are dull as a box of rocks. And they would not do well on the platform by the generic advice of be authentic. I think they would be better served by saying, what are your idiosyncrasies? What are the things that are weird and unique about you that no one else has that same point of view? No one else has that unique way of talking. And how can you leverage that to get your message across?
I would say that personally, I love when you're slaying AI posts. I found those very funny. Um, but like bouncing on what you said is like with my wife when we met, we made the decision from the get go to be who we really were. Like
Okay.
not showing like the sugar coated version, perfect version that you do when you start dating, and then like 6 months later hell breaks loose because
You're
your
like,
true
who is this
your,
person?
your true nature comes out, and both of you are like, should I call you a cab? It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Thanks. That was fun.
oh, yeah, that was
Bye
great.
bye.
Yeah. So and some people were like, man, that sometimes it is sometimes a little bit brutal. But then that like there's no like hidden surprise, you know. And I think I'm going to connect this with something you also said. Is like every brand message should create some like rejection,
Yeah.
some polarization. And to me, this is exactly that. It's like you are who you are. If you try to please everybody, you will please nobody. So it's better to cater to a group that would appreciate for who you are, what you do, than try to cater to everybody and be this sort of like chameleon person or brand or studio or wherever it is. So yeah, and yeah, very important question I had for you.
But before we jump to the next question, can I bounce off that
Sure,
for a second?
of course.
I, I'm not for everybody. You're not for everybody. No
Definitely,
brand,
definitely not.
no brand in the world is for everybody. And so when I see a brief that comes in that says like, we want to talk to everyone from 8 to 88, what I see is just fear. I just see this fear that, oh no, we can't say anything that might alienate somebody. We have to make sure that we make the biggest tent possible. And so we're going to make the most safe choices we can possibly make. That's going to be bland and vanilla, and nobody's going to get upset over. No one's going to send us any letters that says we don't like this. And I just think that's so wrongheaded because when you operate from a place of fear, I don't think you could truly operate in a place that will lead to growth. If you're constantly thinking about how is this going to go wrong, who will not like this, you're not really thinking about how you can actually reach the most people. You're thinking about who's not going to like me. And I never want to operate from that place. I want to be very clear about who I'm for and who I'm not. I want to say like we've gone into pitch meetings where we said, here's actually the clients that get the most value from us. But if you're looking for something like this, for example, if you're just looking for a company that's just going to be an executional production studio, we're not the best fit for you because we're going to be more expensive than what you're looking for because we bring a lot of strategy and we're going to help you figure out how to scale your systems. We're not just going to say, okay, I'll churn out your asset list as cheaply as possible. That's not the way we think about things because we're thinking about how can we deliver the most value. I think we're going to be the best fit for companies that have ambitious marketing goals but don't have a clear marketing a clear creative strategy for how we're going to get there. And you need somebody who can help you figure out how to operationalize creative. those are the people, those are the brands that typically work best with us. And we've kind of self-censored ourselves out of jobs that way because the clients are like, actually, you're right, we need more of a production house. And we're like, great, happy to send you a couple of names of people that we know that are great at that. But ultimately, I don't think we would be the company that brings you the most value. So let's talk about what you actually need and who we can refer you to, because we'd rather you be successful in what you're trying to achieve.
100% agree. But now onto the real question. How is Marvin?
Marvin is great. Where is he? He should be like right over here. He's usually right here. He's hanging around. He's great.
He's always around.
He's always around, in either in my hand or in my heart, one of the two. For those who don't know, Marvin is my pet rock. It's a very smooth stone that I got while I was vacationing in Marfa, Texas. And so I got Marvin from Marfa, and he just has a great like sense of feel to him.
He's very
just
chatty,
very
right?
soothing. He's very chatty. He's got so many opinions, so many perspectives. He's a Texan, so I get it.
I mean, he's in my DMs. He told me like to reach you out to the podcast. So that's why. It's like he made it happen.
He would be a great guest, I feel. He'd have a lot to say.
Now, this question is sort of like a metaphor.
Okay.
Now that we talked about Marvin the Rock, are you a rock? I can elaborate more if you want.
No, I like the question being vague, because I wanna see how how my brain responds to this, because it's going in a couple of different directions. I think that I used to envision myself as a rock in a lot of ways. I used to think that I was a little bit of this immovable object that no matter what forces came my way, I was able to weather that storm and to get through it. I prided myself a lot on being the person that can carry the load. You know what I mean? I think I was always like somebody who, if I was overloaded with work, I was like, yeah, but I can handle it. I can take it on. I can get it. I'm a people pleaser by nature, and I am someone who finds a lot of validation when somebody says, oh, that can't be done, and I figure it out and I get it done and it's better than what they expected. There's a real dopamine pleasure that I get from that. I'm not gonna lie. I have pulled off like expensive live action productions in days. I've done like incredibly crazy things that have been like these Herculean efforts, and I felt a lot of pride from being able to do those things. But I think a lot of the time I was not listening to my body when I was doing that. I was shutting down the sensors that were telling me that I was not doing okay. And I was saying, well, I can just push through. I can just push through. I can just push through. And my wife actually tells me, like, she knows when those moments are happening because I, quote, lose my words. At the end of the day, I just like, I'm like, yeah, sure. Great. Cool. Like, how was your day? Like, I'm kind of a like one word answer kind of person whenever I get into those stages. And so it really did take that moment that I posted about where I was like, I hit that wall where I couldn't pull off the impossible, where I was not able to do the thing that I'm used to being able to do, which is take an impossible task, carry the load, and move forward. And that hit me hard. So I think I realized at that moment that I wasn't a rock. I was movable. I was human. I was fallible. And I had to really cope with that. I think I was as disappointed as I was in like letting the client down as I was with breaking the facade of like my perfect streak of being the person who just is reliable and dependable. And so like I'm not a rock. I think I'm I don't know, maybe I'm sand. Maybe I'm an accumulation of a bunch of things that is able to be manipulated in the elements, but tries to endure. Maybe I'm sand.
Um, I'm just searching for the words into my head. So I would say that I think I was pretty right about my reading. And I'm going to develop on that now.
Okay.
So your persona online is very extrovert sort of character.
Oh, sure. Yeah, for sure.
And certainly you have, like you said, some elements of that in you.
Totally.
But tell me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty convinced that you also have a very strong introvert component in you.
Oh, yes.
And I'm also pretty sure that there's like a whole area of sensitivity in you. And so I understand the shielded persona, to that like takes in all the flood to keep the inner person away from that. And as you said, you were very protected with your family. That being who you are, things always transpire if you want. And you opened when you were describing who you were. I'm going to resume that with saying that you are against injustice.
Very much so.
That's something you cannot tolerate, and I align myself a lot with that too, for multiple reasons. One of them is coming from a country that suffered from a regime, suffering from being in another country when I was very young and being discriminated, and also from suffering from bullying later on when I was at school. So I have like an aversion towards injustice that on my side comes clearly from that aspect. And also, of course, the education that my parents and the values that my parents gave me. I was curious to know where that aversion for injustice comes on your end, from where that comes.
That's a good question because I mean,
if you want to share, of course.
Of course. I mean, it comes from a place that's very different because comparatively, I had a very pampered life. You know, I come from a place of tremendous privilege. I grew up in an upper middle class family in the suburbs of Ohio. And in many ways, I had parents who were incredibly supportive of the fact that I wanted to pursue an artistic career. And in the first few years of my career, I was paid below minimum wage. I was paid below the poverty line, but my parents knew that this was something I was really passionate about, and they were able to financially support me. And, while I was raising two kids and getting paid $28,000 a year and trying to make that work with a college educated, focused degree on a in-demand skill set, right? Like I was exploited in those early phases of my career, but I never felt at that time like I was being exploited. I felt like I was lucky, to be honest. I felt like, oh my goodness, I get to do the thing that I love for my job, and that is awesome. I felt like I was getting away with something because like I got paid to do this thing that I'm passionate about doing. And didn't really understand that I was actually being taken advantage of. And so as I've gotten older and as I've been able to like make big leaps in salary and have been able to make a lot more money and get into higher positions and get into companies where I've actually gotten to see like, oh no, this is actually the value of what I do. I'm recognizing how much exploitation happens with creatives. And I feel like I'm in this position because I do have a lot of privilege and because I have been able to support myself to get in, not to support myself, to have my parents support me, that I could continue on this career until I got to a point where I could support myself. I recognize that that is a tremendous privilege. And I look at the other people who don't have that opportunity, the people who I just am constantly thinking about the kinds of artists that we've lost because the system is not designed to help them get a foot in this career. I just think that there are so many incredibly talented people that never get to be big names because the system has not allowed them to be able to survive doing the thing that they love. But I had that chance. And so I think that it is my responsibility as a person who did have that privilege and who did have that chance to advocate for the people who don't, to speak out against the practices that exploit people and to help artists understand how they can navigate those challenges for themselves and hopefully bring attention to it so that the clients and the companies don't continue that cycle of exploitation. That's I mean, what I would love to happen is for companies to stop underpaying artists, for them to value artists properly, for this concern to never happen. But I don't know if that's ever going to happen. So the best thing that I can do is help other artists recognize where they have power and how they can claim it for themselves. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's how I think about it.
No. It's I would. The first thing I would reply to that is, Kevin, your origins don't matter. And I'm saying this from my origins. I don't care if you had like a golden youth.
Yeah, sure.
I don't care if you come from the slums. What I do care is who you are today, because I consider that nobody's perfect. We've all made mistakes through our different paths, and what matters is like how you position yourself today. And you know, you were mentioning the artists. I would say it's not that important to become a big name, but what I do find important is to be able to express your art. And those artists that you mentioned, despite not becoming a big name, many of them don't get the opportunity to express their art. And to me,
Agreed.
that's the dramatic aspect of it, because you're undercutting people's dreams. And dreams are supposed to be the only place where you can still kind of like be free. I'm going a little bit metaphoric and poetic here, but that's who I am. So,
Yeah.
and that's something I also like try to fight a lot for. And it's one of the reasons why I also want to do this podcast, even if I'm not, even if I'm interviewing people that are well known in the industry. It's to have these types of conversations so those artists feel less alone.
Yeah, because I mean, we're all thinking like, what does it all mean, right? Like, if what is art except like trying to define what your own legacy is, you know, trying to express the way that you have perceived this world and put it on the page in a way that says I was here and this is the way I view things and this is my perspective. And I think it's kind of a cruelty that there are people that are cut away from that opportunity to leave that mark. And I always am thinking about how I can help people understand why it matters for them to do that, to make that mark, to say what they have to say, that their perspectives are not just valid, but invaluable, and that they should continue on the path of making, because it's one of the greatest things that we as humans can do is to make things.
You know that paradoxically enough, the people that discredit or like undervalue art are generally those that unconsciously consume it the most.
Oh, and profiteer from it the most.
Yeah. But like I've heard people through COVID, like, oh, bashing on artists. And I'm like, the only reason you kept your sanity through these 2 years is because
Was
people
art.
made movies and wrote books and wrote songs and made podcasts and everything. Without those people, you will be hanging from a rope that you would have put there yourself because you would have lose your sanity. And that's like, it's this collective unconscious that people never thought about it because they take it for granted.
Yes. It
Um,
is it's the backbone of our society, but it's always treated like it's frivolous, right? Like I think every artist in their career, when they're younger, started drawing on in sketchbooks and had people initially say to them, "Oh my goodness, you're so talented. I'm going to see your name in the movie credits one day. You're just so amazing." And then the second you start to actually go, "Oh, I'm getting all this validation that I should pursue this." And the second you start to make that choice and start to pursue it, you think about going to art school, you think about how you can make this career. Someone says, "Well, what are you going to do with that? Do you have a fallback plan?" Right? Like that's the immediate response. That's the immediate response that people come up with because they view it as frivolous, as arts and crafts. And they don't recognize that it is the backbone of business. I mean, does Apple become Apple without their design department? Like, imagine Apple without Johnny Ive. It is not the brand that it is today. It is not one of the, pillars of commerce and culture that it is. Um, Imagine the world without Jack Kirby, who created so many of the Marvel superheroes. Like there is so much of our culture that is shaped, so much of our society that is shaped off of the backs of artists. And you want to tell me, but what are you going to do with that? I don't know. Make most of what you consume, what drives you to buy things every day, what influences your behavior every day, that what informs you on how to navigate this world. I don't know. Maybe that's what I'll do with that.
you know that I'm pretty convinced that one of the reasons artists are nowadays so undervalued, it's one of those capitalist plays
Oh, totally.
because wield we have power,
Yes.
and that's what the capitalist model do generally is putting the people that has the power into a servant position so they cannot wield that power. And
Absolutely.
I would say that in a way you are a rock, but not for the same reasons you mentioned. You are a rock in the sense of, to me, of being this anchor in the noise for artists and young studios to grab themselves to something that is not only reassuring, but it also shows them the behind the scenes of the thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes a crude reality, but you better be aware of it than just ignore it, or you're gonna be you're gonna be eaten by sharks. And I'm slowly pivoting to something else now.
Okay, let's go.
And part of that crude reality is what you called the unsexy work.
The unsexy work.
The unsexy work.
God bless the unsexy work.
Which is the volume.
Yeah. Absolutely it is.
So, yeah. Just tell us a little bit more about the unsexy work.
For sure. I mean, when we talk about advertising, I think a lot of the things that we talk about are the Super Bowl spots or the big brand ads, something like a Jaguar, right? Like doing something really big and really bold. We talk about the things that make splashes, get big headlines, and get a lot of attention. But I think it's very rare for the majority of artists to get the opportunity to do a piece that gets that kind of attention. I've maybe done one in my career that had that kind of attention, and I don't think even on the scale of some of those other pieces. So the majority of us are doing what you might call production work, what some might call grunt work. We're doing banner display ads. We're doing performance marketing videos that are meant to be a 6-second bumper on YouTube, right? And so we never see structural analyses of the kinds of thought and creativity that have to go into producing unsexy work. We don't really say like, oh, look at all the color and design choices that they made for this banner ad, because no one cares. It's not, it doesn't have a celebrity in it. It didn't have $1 million budget, but it's the type of work most of us are doing. And you have to make just as many intelligent choices to make that stuff work as you do with the Super Bowl ads. And a lot of times they deliver more return on the investment, realistically. Those are the bedrocks of business. They are the bedrocks of a marketing strategy. They are the things that keep the lights on and allow you to do those bigger campaigns. And so I think they're just as critical, but we rarely say, oh, here's why this is working. Because we go, oh, well, it was just shot on an iPhone, or it was just like a social media ad. And we like to like downplay our own contributions. But I've gotten to see how much like something shot on an iPhone can perform for a business. It was one of our highest performing ads for like 2 years, just something that we shot on an iPhone. And we were smart about the choices that we made, and we found ways to iterate on it. And it became like a core part of what we were trying to develop a strategy around. And so I just want to have moments where we can celebrate this kind of work that isn't going to win a Clio or a one pencil anytime soon, but is maybe some of the most important work that a business does because it brings in customers.
Yeah, it's like I always say this to juniors is, if you came here to live like the rock star life, just forget it, because it's not going to be that for 80% of the time.
No.
But that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
And even ask a rock star, after playing for a whole year the same playlist over and over and over again, they just like, fuck this song. Like,
are they loving their life right now? No, they are not.
They and when they get home after that tour, they're on their knees and they're like, just but the label is behind. I'm like, hey, we need to make another album, and like, what,
Uh-huh.
just give a little bit.
Can I have a break, please? Thank you.
Yeah. And it's funny because something I have observed in your communication is also kind of like deconstructing the old agency models.
Yeah.
Not only because the market is changing,
Yes.
but also because I think you said something that caught my attention, is that you are kind of like treating your clients like little birds that you make, like you help them grow until they can
Yeah.
fly and leave the nest,
Absolutely.
and just handle like their capacity themselves, and so you can bring new clients and they can take
Yep.
off.
That's
And
right.
that's still and that's totally I would say uncommon, because
Yeah.
most of the agencies of most of the studios, they want retainers and they want to make clients dependables. And so I'm curious what mental construction with you and your business partners led you to this conclusion, like to this is the model one we want to pursue.
Like it comes down to it. If we're not helping our clients grow, we're not doing our jobs right. Like just realistically, if we are not getting them the creative that they need to make those sales, if they're a B2B company, or acquire more customers or build their brand awareness to the point where they start to grow, we failed. I just think that is a failure on our part. And so when you look at a model, we say, okay, eventually it's going to be more cost effective, just realistically, for a business if we help them grow, to build a team internally. That's just how a lot of these organizations are scaling. They grow to a point and then they say, okay, well, we had a agency of record, or we had a bunch of agency partners that we worked with, and now it's time to start building our own internal team so that we can be more efficient. That just makes sense for them as a business, right? And so how can we accept that that's a reality and accept that that's smart business for them? And we should design a business model that will help them achieve those goals and help them run a business intelligently, rather than do what's in our best interest, which is make them as dependent on us as possible. Like, our thinking behind this is the traditional agency retainer model is designed to benefit the agency, to say, okay, we're going to have this consistent work. We're going to keep churning out stuff. We're going to make them as dependent on us as possible. And we're going to ride this gravy train as long as we can. And hopefully keep like pushing the margins of that retainer out as much as we can year over year. And for us, we said like, well, we're not going to do what's in our best interest. We're going to do what's in our client's best interest, because that's how we actually get the results that we want to deliver, which will attract more clients. If we have a great case study on our belt that doesn't just say, yeah, we helped this business grow, these campaigns performed 15% above benchmark, right? Like, we have a couple great case studies. But I think it's a much better case study that we helped this company go from a 100-person little startup to an 1,500-person public company in just 5 years. And here's the results, and they're doing great now. I think that is so much more powerful of a case study of what our capabilities are and what we can do and what we can offer. So we look at those realities. We look at what's good for our clients versus what's good for us. And we also recognize the fact that all relationships end at some point. Even if you get those retainers going, eventually someone goes, are we still getting the value out of this? Usually someone in finance asks that question, where they say, why are we spending this much money on this agency? What are we getting out of it? And they have to reevaluate things. And then maybe they'll go put out an RFP for another retainer, and they vet a couple of other agencies, and then they have that agency for 3 years, and somebody asked the question, are we really getting the value out of this? Right? Like, I've seen this life cycle happen over and over and over again in the agency world, and I just think it's broken. So I'd rather recognize that the reality is relationships end. How can we design a business relationship that is designed to end at some point? What does onboarding look like? What does our first initial project look like? What does going into a retainer look like? And then what does helping them figure out how to build their own internal team and giving them the guidelines and all of the systems so that they can operate it? And then what does like just a little bit of consulting look like? And then what does offboarding look like? Where we've said, cool, you are on your way and you're crushing it. And I think that runway, like that lifespan, looks like about 5 years. That's about what an average life cycle looks like. And we haven't gone through that fully yet. We're, a 2.5-year-old company. So we haven't really fully experienced that full life cycle. So this is all still theory in practice, but there's a couple of relationships that we see like trending on that trajectory. And we're saying, okay, we're about here. I think we're hitting the milestones that we want to hit in order to like get them to the point where they can scale and we can start to build the systems to help them internally. So like we'll reevaluate as that theory gets into practice and see if that's actually going to be the right model and if we have to make adjustments. But when we think about it from a philosophical standpoint, it makes sense. It makes sense to us to help our clients build something that they can maintain and that they can own. And we can have that relationship for a few years when it makes sense. And then we can build our pipeline so that, while we're finishing out one retainer, we're starting another. And we continue that cycle going, helping a lot of different companies build what we think is the right thing for them.
Yeah, and like how now there's this kind of saying that like most brands are becoming their own media companies in a way.
Very much so.
So it's part of the, let's say, transformative process that's happening now in the business.
Yes.
But what I think it's kind of like the highlight of this is that you're showing the client that you truly care.
Yeah.
It's like
we want you to win.
So
we want you to win, and we're not just going to make the thing that's the prettiest. We're going to make the thing that we think is the right solution for your business. And I think that comes into these macro level decisions about how our business is structured. And it comes down to micro decisions of like, okay, this is why we think this is the right video asset that you deploy in this particular channel. Every single of those decisions, big and small, are coming from the place of this is what we think is the right choice for you to actually get value out of the investment that you're making in creative.
That's the outside facing part of the business.
Yep.
Now, looking towards the inside of the company, do you have like a similar, hatching, growing, and then flying out the nest process for creatives or people, or not, or, because it can also be seen like as something that happens also on the inside, which is totally normal. It's like you make, you go through a life cycle through a company, and then at some point you go like, well, I think I've made pretty much everything I could have done here, and now I will fly to another nest. And so do you have something similar also internally?
So if like I see like a really clear narrative arc for our like retainer relationships and what we think that life cycle is, our internals is more like this, right? Where it's not, there is no 3-act story structure there. It's reactive because we are in a volatile industry in a volatile time. And so there are some months where things are insane and everything's like coming at us and we have to figure out how to batten down the hatches and react to the needs that are coming our way. And there are months where we have to go, okay, cool. We're actually a little light this month. What do we want to invest our time in? How do we want to react to that? And I think that is a natural feast and famine part of being a creative, but it's also we're first time business owners. And so we're like trying to build something new, I guess. I don't know if it's new. It's different from anything we've ever experienced. It's different from any agency that we've ever been a part of. And so we're looking at, okay, what is the structure that makes sense for us to deliver the most value and to also live the type of lifestyle that we want to live? Because, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that we could explore growth, where we could just say, okay, cool, we've got a lot of clients right now. Let's just build some scaffolding and go like crazy and start scaling, which is what I have seen a lot of companies do, where they say, okay, let's start to grow ourselves to accommodate what we have right now. And so we build the structure, and now it's no longer about reacting to the business that comes in. It's now we have to go out and get the business to feed this thing that we built. And I just think that is such a hard way to live, because you are just constantly under that pressure of how am I going to maintain this monster that I've built? And I've just seen that crush business owners just like emotionally, of just trying to figure out, oh no, we have all this headcount. How are we going to keep this going? Like, how do we make sure that we keep having all this work? We got to go out and sell. Even if it's not the right work for us to take on. Even if this client is giving us red flags, we've got to take it on because we need more revenue. So we are looking at, how do we react to what's happening? How do we react to the type of business that's coming in? What is forecasting looking like? And how do we build the right kind of scaffolding that we need to make sure that this is not really scalable? Because we're not really looking at how do we scale as fast as possible. We're looking at how do we make this sustainable? How do we continue this in a way that supports our lifestyle instead of takes over it?
Yeah, I was going to say instead of like build up, build down.
Yeah.
Like build the foundations. I see this like, the foundations of buildings made in countries where there's like earthquakes, sort of. Like make your foundations flexible enough so when the earthquake comes, your building is still standing in a way. It doesn't matter if it's like 100 like levels up. That's not the purpose, because if the earthquake comes and everything falls down, then what's
it doesn't matter
point?
how tall the building was, it still fell.
Exactly. But I mean, what you said, like this monster that we have to feed, it's still kind of like the old agency mentality.
Yes.
But those were other times. Like you said, we are in a very chaotic moment right now worldwide. Economically speaking, politically speaking, it's very complicated, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and you can feel it in the market in general.
Yes, absolutely.
And what I find kind of like troubling is in these kind of moments, it's always the opposites. So on one end, I know you have like a certain amount of the market that is really like cutting down stuff and preparing for bad times.
Yeah.
But then on the other spectrum, you have a few that are like, and you're like, what the, like, how, like, you don't understand kind of like the dichotomy of that. And of course, everybody tries to cater to those that are like spending the money.
Yes.
But that creates such an influx of people that it's like impossible to manage. I mean, you can see them. You see it on LinkedIn. Like
Yep.
somebody says like, "Hey, we have an boom like 500 posts below instantly from all over the world." And so since you are since you care about the artists, do you see? I mean, this is very difficult to predict, so I'm gonna try to formulate my question differently. But it's more like, let's treat this differently.
Okay.
Let's say tomorrow, Ultra Friends needs to hire people. Okay.
Yes.
I'm curious which channel you're going to pick to start looking for starters. Mm-hmm. And secondly, how do you will manage that influx of people? The reason I'm asking you this is because there's so much opacity on those processes, those hiring processes. And what I'm seeing is a lot of people literally depressed because they've been answering to hundreds of job posts and they don't even get an answer. And I understand that it has to be very difficult as a hiring manager to answer to 500, 700 applications. I understand.
Yes.
But there's also ways to establish systems that allow you to, even if it's not personalized, at least
say, thank you for your application. We're moving in a different direction. Yeah,
exactly. And so I'm curious how, since we were talking about caring about people and putting human in the center of this conversation, how would you face those things? Or like, how do you actually face those things?
That's a really good question. And this might be a cop-out answer. But realistically, like as a 2-person business, we are not foundationally set up to be able to hire right now. So I think the first thing that I would do is bring in a consultant that could help us hire ethically and say, what is the system that we should set up? How can we build like a, what's the best portal system to like manage applications coming in? How can we set this up structurally so that we can, handle the volume and be able to like review things and weed out, some of the stuff that we know, like, oh, somebody applied for a video editor position and they're a copywriter, right? Like, how do we weed out the things that we know are going to be low-hanging fruit that like we know aren't a good fit? And then how do we set up the system so that we can take the time to review everything properly? Whenever I was hiring, when I was in the corporate space, like I tried to give absolutely every single application the respect and consideration that it deserved, because I don't want to just like say, okay, like first 2 seconds of this demo reel just aren't doing the trick for me, so let's move on. So I was always like building out hiring blocks where I would block off my calendar and I would just take time to review portfolios, just take time to review submissions. Hiring is a full-time job, honestly, a lot of the time. When you have that many submissions, you have to treat it like it is one of your core priorities. And you still have to manage a lot of the responsibilities of a full-time job. So I think there's a couple of key things that I would set up is I would talk to a professional that would set us up with the right system so that we could review things properly and like respond in a timely manner that's ethical. I would set aside very specific time to be able to give those key considerations. And I would build a hiring process that's very clearly outlined, that sets proper expectations, that has a clear salary range that is reasonable and above market value, like all of the things that would showcase that we value talent. Like we think talent is a lot of times more important than our relationships with our clients, because we can never do the work and maintain the business that we have. We can't maintain those client relationships if we don't have the best talent. And so we need to treat the hiring process like it is with the same level of rigor and the same level of respect that we treat the biggest pitch that we've ever done, because they are just as important and just as critical to the business.
Which sadly is very hardly the case nowadays.
It's rare. It's very rare.
Yeah. And like, you know, I'm going to start like, I don't know if you have time, but like I will start like landing the planes slowly. You raise a flag when you feel it's the coal starts to run hot.
All right, cool. Let's go.
I'm going to ask you this question because the previous guest of the podcast, which will be released in the following days, it wasn't my question, but he decided to talk about like a certain technology that nowadays is very strongly promoted on social media by a lot of people.
Yep.
And I'm not judging because everybody has its own position here. He praised that technology.
Yep.
Because it's been really helpful for him, and he sees potential, even if he's convinced that it's going to destroy us all maybe one day. But for now, he's riding the roller coaster. And I know you have a different position regarding that.
I have a slightly different perspective on that.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Just a little nuance.
I don't know why. I don't know how I feel it, but and I don't want to talk about that technology. We've heard enough. But
we've heard so much.
But I want to hear about like the human reasons why you're against it. That's the part. That's the meat that interests me.
Well, I think it's a symptomatic. I think it's a symptom of the larger problem, which is the large scale cultural and business devaluation of creative contributions. Right? Like, it is a tech company trying to take all of human creative contributions, put it into a blender, and then productize it for their own profit. Right? So it is trying to say, oh, like dreams and imagination and years of hard fought talent and individual personal creative perspectives are something that we can replace with an algorithm and do all of those very human things for a fraction of the cost. It is disaster capitalism at its finest, right? It is, we can take all of the things that are deeply human and personal and find a way to turn it into a repeatable system that we can productize for cheap. And we as creatives have faced these types of devaluations throughout our entire careers, right? We have had to work for exposure bucks. We've had to pitch clients for free, right? Like, all of these things are part of that larger symptom, which is that businesses don't value creatives because they don't understand it. They don't understand the connection between our dreams and ideation and our expertise and business outcomes. And historically, I think creatives haven't been great at telling the story of those connections. Because a lot of the time we talk about why we're expert storytellers. We're storytellers and problem solvers. We're passionate about the craft. And a CMO gives two shits about your craft. They don't care. They
Literally
care about outcomes. Yeah, do not care. They care about outcomes. And so when they see this productized way to say, cool, I can get to outcomes cheaper, that's a really easy thing to sell. It's so easy to sell. It's cheaper. It's the easiest thing in the world to sell. It's why Geico will save you 15% in 15 minutes or less. It's why everybody will tell you a Memorial Day deal or a BOGO buy one, get one free, right? Like cheap, cheap is the easiest sales pitch in the world. And so I'm against it as a human because I think it is so fundamentally wrong-headed about what the value of creative is. The value of creative isn't cheap execution. The value of creative isn't just we made a pretty picture that is devoid of human context and human strategy. That's not the value of creative. The value of creative is something that emotionally resonates with an audience in a way that changes their perception or changes their behavior. That's what creative does. That's the value. And I have yet to see any evidence that work produced by this process outperforms the value of what a human creative has to offer. And so until I see any evidence, I'm not going to change my mind. And the unethical ways in which it's built make it very easy for me to say, this is not something I want to be a part of. It is like everything that I think of about the way creatives are exploited turned into a product designed to make like very wealthy people even wealthier.
Yeah, but it's like two things. Like one is if your business model is to make money based on stealing all the intellectual property in the world,
then you don't have a business model.
That's not a business model. That's one thing. And the second thing is like I think because I've seen and I know quite a few shops that use AI internally.
Yep.
Maybe not for end product, but they use it for I think there's multiple kinds of uses. Like
sure.
For example, Lobo just outputted like a spot, and I think they made kind of like the proper use of it in the sense of they have a model trained with their own material
data.
So they feed it the system with all this collage style, all these things that they painted, they made themselves, and that became the renderer for the thing that was cell animated. So it was still drawn by artists by hand, cell animated through the whole piece, but then the texturing of it was using that engine. They kind of like
really
developed internally, which was interesting. But then I've seen also those shops that are kind of like caught up in the rat race, of things get faster and faster, and clients want more and more and cheaper. And so one of the easy things to turn to is this technology. And because in a way they think they are, getting more for cheaper again, and faster.
Yep.
Now the thing is, legally, can you output work like that to a client? Is it publicly displayable?
My personal opinion, based on my understanding of the law, is that no, it is not. Now, with the current administration and the way that AI has become a major priority, will those legal concerns change? Quite possibly. But when I look at every time that I've had to produce video content and all of the legal clearances that I've had to gain to make sure that like something in the background was like Creative Commons license, to make sure that like even if we had some set decoration in the background, that it was totally legally cleared for us. Like I would never be willing to put a creative element into something that a client was purchasing from me without knowing with 100% certainty that they have no legal liability with putting that work into the market. I just would never, because I just don't want them to assume that liability. I think that's just being responsible as a partner and a collaborator to protect your clients from getting sued.
And I think that's like independently from whatever we're talking here. So it doesn't matter which video image technology we're talking, this applies to everything. It's like no matter what you're using, you have to be sure that there's no liability in what you're outputting outside. But now you own a shop and so you have clients that probably mention to you or talk about this technology to you.
Yep.
And so in a way, sometimes it's you're swimming against the current, probably. Sure. And I honestly, I admire the fact that you are fighting to output all this work ethically, like you said. But how do you swim against that current? Yeah. Like how do you bring awareness to your clients about what you're trying to do and why? Maybe sure, it's gonna cost a little bit more, but it's for these and these reasons, and then being open to hear it.
So there's two ways we look at it. Number one is that concept we talked about before, where we are not for everybody. If you are asking the question, how are you going to produce this in the cheapest way possible? And can you use this unethical technology to make sure that it's as cheap as possible? You're not going to be a good fit for us as a client in general, because you're not focused on the right things. You are focused on how can I make the cheapest creative rather than how can I make the creative that is going to deliver the biggest return on the investment? Because at the end of the day, if something is produced for $0 or is produced for $10,000 or $100,000, they're still putting hundreds of thousands of dollars of media behind it, maybe millions of dollars of media behind it. I've had things that I've made that are just like basic performance marketing ads that multiple millions, tens of millions of dollars have been put behind to run it through the algorithm of Facebook and Google, right? So it doesn't matter how cheap it is, you're still spending money. And I'd rather you be able to feel confident that the work that you're spending tens to millions of dollars behind is going to attract the client base that you're trying to attract, is going to motivate them to make behavior change. And I just don't feel that that kind of content is going to do the job. So those clients aren't a good fit for us anyway. And so we will be very upfront and honest about what our approach is, because we would rather censor ourselves out of a job than work with a client who's a bad fit, because it'll come through in every aspect of the relationship that we are not the right fit for them, and it will just be a painful process. The other aspect of it is that we are trying to do this for their benefit. And so we don't just frame it as, it's unethical, it's stupid, we hate it. I mean, sometimes I will say things like that on LinkedIn, but what I'm really getting at is I don't think the value is there for the clients in the long run. Because you still have to put media dollars behind it, I don't think that this work is going to be as effective as the work that we can create through our specific process. And if you are concerned about cost effectiveness, we have a lot of solutions on how we can generate work that is cost effective. We think about systems. We build content in systems in order to maximize the amount of output that you get, but it's so much more controlled that You don't have to worry about, is this prompt going to get me the result that I want? We know you're going to get the result you want. And we know that we can control those variables very tightly so that you can test messaging and you can test content against each other to find out what is working for you. So we think in the long run, we're actually able to beat out on the cost effectiveness standpoint. If you stick with it and follow our process, we have ways to get you that cost effectiveness and the low cost of deliverables if you follow our systematic process. So like we can help you get what you're trying to get, and we can do it in a way that you can copyright the work, that you can own it, that you can feel confident that there's no legal liability, and that you can feel confident that the creative is going to resonate. So I think it's better for you to do it this way. And that's genuine. That's not me just fighting against the tide. That's not me just saying, well, that's a competitor and I think it sucks. It's me saying, I think you genuinely get more business value doing it this way.
You know, it's kind of like the metaphor of like, when you have to buy a power tool, and do you invest in like a very good one so you have an upfront cost that is higher? Sure.
Yep.
But then that thing is going to last you for years.
Yep.
Or do you buy the cheap one and then
That
it breaks?
you swap
You
out
have
in a
to,
year.
yeah, you fix it. You buy another one, and then you keep on like. And in the end, you ended up like spending way more money than buying the real thing in the beginning. So
100%.
Kind of like to start closing it up is now, how do you project? This is a twofold question.
Yeah.
So it's related to work, but also you as a person.
Sure.
Is how do you project yourself into the near or distant future ahead of us now, as a creative, but then also as a person?
Yeah. I think the thing that I have looked at as a priority for this year is to achieve clarity on how I want to maintain balance. Because I've fallen heavily out of balance because I am building a new business, because I'm active on a social media platform, building an online personality, because that has opened up other opportunities for me. And I have always wanted to say, well, let's explore that. That's something that is cool and new and different. And that could be something that delivers something really powerful. So sure, let's try it. And I think where I'm trying to go is to a place that has a clearer sense of the priorities of what I really want to go after, and to say no more to the things that aren't aligned with those goals, which is honestly, I think, the most critical role of a business owner. Like the best CEOs that I've ever worked with are the ones that know how to prioritize. The ones that say, yes, there are all these things we can do, but we're going to do this. Why? Because that's the thing that I think is going to be the right move for the business, and all this other stuff can fall away because while it's cool, it's not the thing that I think is going to be the right move for the business. And so I need to be that kind of CEO for my business and for my life. I need to be the person who can prioritize relationships, which is not something I've been able to do very well recently. Like my friends will text me and be like, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. Are you okay? And I'm like, no, but I'm working on it. And so I would love to be able to be a person that reaches out to my friends more often. I would love to be a person that is able to, make more time to just sit and be present in my interactions with my family than I am right now. I would love to be a person who has very clear ways in which I want to use this weird online space that I've navigated and be really intentional about it. But right now, like that intention isn't there because I haven't prioritized it properly. And so I in this recovering from, I tried to do too much and it broke me. I am now like looking at the pieces on the ground and saying, what are the ones that are okay if they just fall away? And what are the ones that I really want to bring up and put this puzzle together in a way that makes sense?
That's interesting. It's something some of what you're saying is something I've been trying to do also, because you get caught up in this monster machine that eats you alive, and then suddenly you look back and you go like, shit, it feels pretty lonely here. And it's sort of like a gymnastic that you have to like, you like when you go back to the gym and you are a little bit rusty, and this is kind of like the same. It's like it's a matter of like being constant. It's something that you have to include in sort of like a routine, because it's very easy. It's the classic story of like, hey, we should catch up soon and go for a drink or eat something. 2 years later, hey, we should catch up for a drink. It's like, because at no point somebody goes like, you know what, like, take your agenda now, I take mine. When do you have an open spot?
Yep.
And that's sort of like what I'm trying to do now when somebody tells me, or what I'm saying, like, hey, we should, like, you know what? No, we shouldn't. Nothing. It's like, let's pin down.
I'm going to look at my calendar right now.
Let's do it now, because otherwise it will happen never.
It will happen never.
And certainly, you have to shuffle stuff around, and but then like when you connect with those things again, it's so rewarding. Even if you're tired, like there's been moments when I'm tired, like the day was brutal, I really don't want to go, but I said I would go, so I'm gonna go. And once I'm there, like, I'm tired.
It's like, oh my God, I'm so glad. I'm so glad I did this.
And and when I come back, I'm like, I took the right decision to be there. So being in a world where we are kind of isolated more and more and more and more, even from our families, I think it's important to. I don't want this to sound kitschy, but like, it's important to regain again those natural connections that we used to have.
No, that's not kitschy at all. That is like why we're on this earth, right? Like, to build that community, like that is ingrained in us, in our DNA. And I think it's very easy to lose sight of that when you have to deal with the day-to-day realities of running a business that sometimes runs you, right? Because you feel like, oh, I have to do this thing. I have to do this. And we like chose to do this, like, okay, I'm going to do this thing on my own and I'm going to make those choices. But you just look at it and go, well, I never really actually made any choices. I just kind of said yes to everything. And even when it wasn't the right fit, even when it wasn't right for me, and I let my business run me instead of running my business.
In a sense, the system is kind of like set up like that, if you want. So, and I think it's a beautiful way to close this conversation, also, to kind of like finish with this message of like, don't lose control on things.
Don't lose control. Yeah.
Because it's too easy to keep on running like a headless chicken around, putting out fires, and what you're losing is way more, like, is sorry, I'm losing my English at this time of the night.
You're crushing it. You're crushing it.
It's those things you will lose are the value of those things is way more important than what you will get for this gig or this other project.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Kevin, thanks for being with me.
Thank you for having me. This was a wonderful conversation that hopefully everyone enjoys the meandering ways that it went through for the entire duration.
I wanted it that's the way I want the podcast to be. To be honest,
Yeah.
slow, long, so people take the time. You know, I want people to take the test. Like, even if you're working, it's running in the background, or you're driving, it doesn't matter. Just take the time, sip it in, pause it, listen to the rest later. That's how it needs. That's how I intend it to be consumed. Um, Thank you. Honored to have you, and talk to you soon.
Sounds great, buddy.